think we have.
Do we have
Have
the
a
mics?
mic.
Excellent. We're changing it up this
Should
time.
we just
I'll
use
put it-
the same format we always do?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, I break something that works well. Why the hell not?
It's gonna happen.
I know it was the most ridiculous thing.
Amy, you want to go ahead and get started? Yeah. Yeah.
Melissa Stewart was here too.
Everyone.
I saw her somewhere.
I'm Amy Morrison. I'm the president here at Lake Washington Institute of Technology. You may have noticed some construction out front. Thank you to our state legislators. We're building our first instructional building here for 2 years.
That's right.
We're very much looking forward to having classes in our brand new Center for Design and LW Tech Event Center this fall. Across the road from the new Center for Design is our brand new Early Learning Center. That will be reopening in April, so if you know of young families, we've proudly served the community in that child care center for 25 years. So if you know of young families who are looking for quality child care, let us know. They can find information on our website, lwtech.edu. Thank you all for being here. LW Tech has been proud to host our legislators all of my time here, if not before. So I'm very pleased to welcome back Senator Moncadingra, Representative Larry Springer, and Representative Roger Goodman. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. As the oldest person up here, chronologically and tenured in the legislature.
My name is Larry Springer. I'm representing the 45th District now in my 22nd year. We'll each give you just a little bit of background of what we got, what our roles are at the legislature. I am the Deputy Majority Leader for the House Democratic Caucus, which makes me part of the 9-member leadership team for the 59 members who are Democrats in the House. Committee. That's the tax policy committee. It's the committee that determines tax policy. I like to say it's the committee that raises money for the state. And I serve on the appropriations committee, which is the committee that determines how to spend the money the finance committee raised. So that takes up most of my time. Between those two fiscal committees, my policy committee is the agriculture and natural resources committee. And my major role there, as it has been for the last 4 years, has been developing a statewide strategy for wildfire mitigation. Wildfire is just the reality of our future. It's going to be with us, and we need to be able to proactively not only control that as best we can, but also help those communities that are most at risk. And when I say most at risk, think here Duval, North Bend, Cle Elum, Roslyn, Leavenworth, Wenatchee, Spokane, all cities very, very at risk for wildfire. So that's what I spend most of my policy time on, and I'll turn it over to Roger.
Thank you, Larry. I'm Roger Goodman, and I'm the junior member of the House delegation. I've only served for 20 years. I'm not saying I'm the junior member, and I just became eligible for Social Security too, so I'm officially an old man. So thank you very much for coming out today. Always a pleasure to do this in person. We recently did a telephone town hall, but it's much better, in my opinion, to have you physically present. I've been serving for, I think, 13 years now as the chair of what's now called the Community Safety Committee. In the past, it was Public Safety or Criminal Justice. It's the committee that has jurisdiction over our criminal code and criminal procedure and all things related to public safety. These days, the big theme is resisting the federal regime. There's all sorts of unauthorized enforcement activity happening that we need to protect ourselves from, including our own law enforcement. Our own dedicated law enforcement is sort of stuck in the middle, and we're trying to come up with guidelines so that they can not get in trouble themselves, but also document what's happening. What happened in Minnesota may very well come here. And so we need to be prepared. So we're occupying a lot of our time with issues related to that. I also sit on the Civil Rights and Judiciary Committee, which is the civil side of law. My committee is the criminal side. There are very few lawyers in the legislature, believe it or not, so I'm sort of looking out for that branch of government. Wide variety of issues in that committee. And I also serve on the Human Services Committee, which is a lot of sad topics, people falling into misfortune, the developmentally disabled, those who can't afford childcare or preschool, really trying to help the most vulnerable in our society. So, pleasure to be here, looking forward to your questions, and I'm going to pass it on to Senator Dingler.
Thank you. I'm going to stand up so I can see everyone, even those in the back. My name is Monica Dingler. I'm the senator representing this incredible legislative district. And Larry just leaned over and said, that makes you a child, because I've been in the legislature for 8 years. So I guess compared to my seatmates, that's where I am. I too am honored to be the Deputy Majority Leader of the Washington State Senate. And I'm really proud to lead our senators along with our Majority Leader, Senator Peterson. I chair a Law and Justice Committee, and that actually has bills that go to both of Rogers' committees, the Public Safety and the Civil Rights and Judiciary. And I also sit on Environment, Energy, and Technology, which makes a lot of sense given the district we live in. And I am also on Ways and Means, and that is the committee which handles all the money stuff. So those are basically the committees I sit on. However, a lot of the work that I do, in addition to my committee setting, is really taking a look at healthcare. I was on the healthcare committee for 6 years and was recently moved to energy, environment, and technology, but that is again something especially with mental health, substance use disorder, and frankly access to healthcare across the spectrum that I do a lot of work on. I want to take an opportunity and introduce my staff. Daisy Wong is my legislative aide. Hopefully you've all met her or seen her. Definitely received emails from her in the last couple of years. We're very excited to have her. I have my session aide, Eric, and my intern, Sophia, who is also a constituent. And I love embarrassing our little kids because her mom's here as well. So yay, Sophia, for bringing your family out. And so I just want to talk a little bit about what the priorities were for the Senate Democrats going into this session. I think everyone knows that we have a really tough economic situation facing us. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we have a tax code that's about 100 years old. And we have to make sure we're modernizing it to make sure it fits the needs and the structure of today's society. And so taking a look at affordability is really key on what we continue to do in the state of Washington. And we also have to make sure we're doing a lot of work around the overreach of the federal government. The cuts that this state is experiencing in terms of cutting healthcare access, housing, are tremendous. There is no way that the state budget can make up for the cuts that the federal government has imposed on us when it comes to reducing access to healthcare. And this is real because I've been talking to a lot of our community groups, especially mental health organizations, substance use disorder organizations, and they are really fearful on how they're going to be able to meet the needs of people moving forward. Because we know that when people are uninsured, they don't get the care they need, and they will end up sicker and accessing their emergency rooms. I was very proud for years as to talk nationally on our access to healthcare in the state of Washington. We had one of the lowest uninsured rates in the country, and a lot of that is now going away. And so really figuring out how we can continue to provide access to healthcare for the state of Washington is something that is critical, and there's a lot of work we've been doing around that. And then the same thing that I'll mention that Roger mentioned in terms of ICE activity. Those recently Seattle Times piece that actually showed that the vast majority of individuals that ICE has frankly just kidnapped off our streets have been here legally and have no criminal history. And we cannot turn into a country that does not recognize civil rights. And so we're going to... So we have a lot of bills around making sure that we require judicial warrants, that we require our ICE agents to identify themselves as law enforcement, as every other law enforcement officers do in the state of Washington. We expect them to abide by the same rules. about protecting sensitive areas like hospitals and schools and daycares so that people can actually access the care they need without being afraid. So lots of work will continue in that, and I look forward to a conversation and questions. Thank you. Oh, and one more thing. I know we're passing out comment cards. If you don't have any, please raise your hand, and our staff will come and get you a comment card and pen. Please do write them down. And I'm going to turn over to Larry, who actually runs this show and is the MC, and he'll explain the process on how we're going to move forward.
Okay, thanks, Margaret. Before I do that, one of the things that I want to do is introduce other electeds that are with us today. We have Kirkland Mayor Kelly Curtis. Kelly Wayne, there she is. Deputy City Council members, Vanessa Kritzer, where are you, Vanessa? Back there. And Melissa Stewart. There's Melissa. And just for my own self-preservation, I also need to introduce the Kirkland City Council member and Mayor Emeritus Penny Sweet.
His wife.
That gets me dinner tonight. The process, as Monka mentioned, you have those comment cards. If you have questions, please write them down. Raise your hand, and our staff will come around and pick them up and bring them up here, and then we'll try and get through. In that regard, I want to introduce my staff, which is Emily Wills, who's right here in front. And I'm an intern as well. Roger and I share an intern. Sylvia Miller, right back against the wall. Roger.
Senator Dinger's intern is named Sophia, and our intern is named Sophia. And my incredible legislative assistant, Angela Langer, is here too. Can function without me.
I gotta tell you, I love all the questions about the millionaire's tax.
Yeah, let me take on the sheriff's bill right away here.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, so in our state, this is a question about, it's a bill, Senate Bill 5974. I sponsored the companion House Bill, House Bill 1399, which took the slings and arrows last year, so we flushed out what the issues are. In our state, there are a number of county sheriffs, elected county sheriffs, including Pierce County, not just rural sheriffs, who call themselves constitutional sheriffs, that they abide by the Constitution as they interpret it. And so that means that if they don't like the gun safety laws that we've passed, they don't enforce them. If they don't like protecting wildlife, if they think that all elections are rigged, if they and don't want to protect the voting process, and if they want to round up immigrants and refugees, hold them in jail for ICE to pick them up. These are the kinds of things we're hearing from these constitutional sheriffs. And some of them are actually taking action on this. So it turns out that law enforcement executives, sheriffs, and police chiefs are appointed by a city council or mayor, do not have to abide by the same qualifications and the same requirements that the people who work for them, the deputies and the other officers. And that is not a good example. So the bill that we are moving through makes sure that sheriffs, whether elected or appointed, and police chiefs are all trained and certified and accountable under the very same rules as those who work for them. So they have to go through a background check before they run for election. And if the background check shows that they are not qualified to run, then they cannot serve. If they are decertified because of misconduct during their tenure, they have to leave office immediately. Needless to say, these constitutional sheriffs are not happy about this, and I've had to keep my back against the wall for the last 18 months. So we're going to get this through, because this is really ultimately about the rule of law, and it's about respect by the public for law enforcement. So the big issue is this having to leave office if you're decertified, and we're going to be battling over that. But the other question is what are called the posses. Sheriffs out in the rural areas are assembling volunteers. They call them posses, just like in the 1800s. I feel like we're back in 1853. In Grant County, for instance, to be a member of the sheriff's posse, you have to have a gun and a horse, just by example. These are completely untrained individuals who are very enthusiastic out there doing law enforcement activities and endangering the public and violating our laws. So another part of this bill is to make sure that volunteers, so-called volunteers, cannot engage in law enforcement activities. Our urban police departments certainly use volunteers for legitimate purposes, tending to the animals and directing traffic and all sorts of things that don't involve use of force or arresting people. So we're accounting for that. But we don't want these posses running around, hunting cougars with dogs, running through people's property at night with flashlights and terrorizing people. And the other thing is, across the country, a lot of rural sheriffs are saying, oh, in Washington State, they're forming posses. We should do the same thing. So we really need to short-circuit that and stop it so that it doesn't sort of spread around the country. So this is a very important bill, particularly for our immigrants and refugees who are now besieged by some law enforcement who are not abiding by the law. So Meredith, I'm not sure where you are, but thank you very much for asking the question. Meredith's been a leader in our community on gun safety, and that's another thing that these constitutional sheriffs do not want to abide by. They think that the gun safety laws we've passed are just unconstitutional. In fact, the courts have ruled that they are constitutional, so those are just the sheriff's opinions. So as you can tell, I feel very strongly about this, and I think that we need to uphold law enforcement, and we need to make sure that we're working well with them. There's good community relations with law enforcement, but that means that they have to abide by the law. And the first line in this bill, believe it or not, is that the duty of the sheriff is to enforce the law. We actually have to put it in the law that the sheriff has to enforce the law. So it's kind of absurd, but that's where we've come. A lot of issues like that in our polarized society right now.
I was actually looking forward to this bill coming from the House last session, and I want to thank Roger for his leadership on working on this issue for the last few years. So last year, the Law and Justice Committee did a work session on this bill. We heard from experts around the country on what other states are doing and making sure that we've modernized our practice of law enforcement. And so the bill that passed the Senate floor and is now over at the House does exactly that. It's very consistent with what we expect with everyone in our criminal system. In order to be a judge, you have to have a bar license. If you get disbarred, you don't get to be a judge anymore. If you're an elected prosecutor, guess what? You need a bar license. If you get disbarred, guess what? If you want to be an elected sheriff, you have to be a certified law enforcement officer. If you're decertified, guess what? You don't get to be an elected sheriff anymore. And so there's a lot of politics behind this bill, but to me, that is at its essence. We, as a state, authorize individuals to carry a gun and basically give them permission to take a life. And what I've said very often, that with great power comes great responsibility. And so yes, you have to be a certified law enforcement officer in order to do this. And for some people who didn't understand why we needed this bill, I would urge you to hear what happened in the Law and Justice Committee, where we have senators sitting there. We have a sheriff that sits in front of me and tells me he does not recognize the authority of the senators in the state of Washington. This is an elected sheriff telling senators that he does not recognize our authority. And then he goes on to tell us that if we pass certain bills, he has people that he will round up and take to government buildings, and he's ready. Are we ready? This is done on the record, being televised. So I can tell you, I greatly worry about what this individual does when he's not being televised, when he's not in public. And so this bill is critical in ensuring that we continue to have law enforcement officers that have the training, the credibility with the community. And I can tell you the line officers, the officers who are working, so many of them support this bill because they want leaders who have the same training as they do, have been law enforcement officers, and that is what happens in every profession. You need leaders who understand who they're leading and what the rules and responsibilities are and what the training is that's needed to hold that position. So thank you for your engagement on this. Since I have the mic, there's one question about the CCA and about taking CCA dollars in order to help us adjust the budget. And I will tell you, this was something I said last year as well, that I'll continue to say here. I fundamentally believe that the CCA is to ensure that we are making great improvement on addressing climate change. We have to be serious about it. And we have to continue to lead, because the federal government is not. They are going backwards when it comes to what they're doing to our environment, to our air, to our soil. And we have to make sure we're standing up and doing the right thing and leading by example. It is going to be a tough budget year, and I can tell you what I'm going to be pushing for. I'm sure there'll be a compromise at the end, but I know many in the Senate are also sticking with that line and making sure CCA dollars stay with CCA.
Just a quick follow-up. I was thinking about the CCA questions, Climate Commitment Act. One of the reasons why I'm really strongly advocating that we maintain the funding in the CCA for its intended purpose is because that's the source of funding that I hope to secure to battle wildfire. If you take a look at some of the statistics from Chelan County, Washington, by the way, there is no county in the nation that is more at risk for wildfire than Chelan County, Washington. And I just saw a study that was done over the last 10 years. The amount of CO2 and particulate matter released into the atmosphere from wildfire is by a factor of 6 times more than all of the internal combustion engines that run for a year in Chelan County. To the extent that just last year, a couple of fires in Chelan County released 1.5 million metric tons of CO2 and particulate matter. So CCA is directly associated with that, and we hope we can do something about that. One of the questions we want to get to right here, because we want to leave time at the end so I can walk around with the microphone, but one of the questions that a lot of these cards are dealing with is the proposed millionaire's tax, as it's called, the income tax on the amount of money people make over $1 million. That has been a great source of controversy, as you can imagine. Everybody's writing about it, everybody's talking about it. And I will just give you, each of us will give you our own take on that. Mine is an income tax, whether it's on the people over $1 million or on everybody, is in fact a much more progressive taxation system than the one we have now. And fundamentally, most of us, including myself, support that. The proposal that's being brought now, in my mind, has one area that it does not address, and maybe it will, but we're in kind of a tight budget crunch. And that is, it does not, at this point, it doesn't appear as if it will dramatically or significantly reduce the regressive tax burden on the poorest of the poor. Those two ideas really need to go together. That will be a very difficult hurdle to overcome because we're actually in a deficit. So I'll give you an example. The millionaire's tax was about $3 billion-ish, around $3 billion it raises. If you cut the sales tax by 1%, all that money's gone. So that's the dilemma we have. And it's a matter of probably trying to take some incremental steps. That will take years to get us where we need to go. So, right.
So I don't want Washington to be in the same club with Tennessee and Florida, who have the most regressive. Tennessee amended its constitution recently, so we don't rank 49th, we rank 48th in terms of how regressive our tax system is. Washington is a tax haven for the super rich. We can't fund our public schools adequately. We're back down to maybe 42%, I believe, of the budget, down from 53 or 52% just a few years ago. Basic education is a paramount duty, and we're not amply funding it. We need the funds. So, along with everything else, right, as Senator Ding was saying, the federal government cut $1.5 billion of Medicaid that we have to make up for. And so we need to generate the revenue. This is not a spending problem, as some have said. We cut our budget to the bone back in the Great Recession, and cut the safety net, cut environmental protection, cut higher ed. That's the situation we're in now, again, and we don't want to have to do that. I hope that we've learned a lesson. So the 9.9% tax on those earning, for every dollar over $1 million, so if you earn $1 million, you don't pay anything. If you earn $2 million, you'll pay 100,000. So you get, if you earn $2 million, you get to keep 1,900,000. And you can pile it in your backyard, all that unproductive wealth. And there's a lot of people in our community in that position. And when I talk to those people, the majority of them say, yes, I want to support our community. I want to contribute to the commons. Please tax me. Believe it or not, most people I talk to around here who are that wealthy agree that there needs to be more fairness in the tax system. So I'm supporting this tax. It will bring in about $3.6 billion, which we need now. It's going to go to the courts. It might very well go to the people, so the people will have a chance to vote on it. The last time that people had a chance to vote on a tax was the capital gains excise tax, and that was approved significantly by a significant margin. So I think the people are there as well in terms of tax fairness, and I am supporting this. I'm actually supporting increasing taxes on a lot of people who live around here, but they're not really paying very much at all, and there needs to be some equity. Those in the bottom quartile of the population here pay 18% of their income in taxes. The top 1%, the folks we're talking about here, pay, what, 4% of their income in taxes. That's not right, and we need more equity, so I'm supporting this tax.
I think the clapping and the booing is actually what the statistics show, that 70% of the people support this tax. I'm not going to say that. Statistically, that's where it is. It's like a 70-30 split. So I was a co-sponsor of the Billionaires Tax, and I've been talking about tax fairness literally from the time I ran for office 8 years ago. I'm very proud of a lot of stuff we do in Washington. We lead in so many areas. Our tax code isn't one of them. We are one of the most regressive tax structures in the country. 41 other states actually have a millionaire's tax, so we're not an outlier. And I just want to be very clear, it's taxed above your first million in income. So you don't pay any taxes for your first $1 million in income. This is not counting your house, it's not counting real property, it's not counting your stocks, it's about the income you make. And even after that first $1 million, you get to write off your capital gains excise tax and all this other stuff. If you have a small business, we are actually in this tax. Well, when Larry talked about fixing a tax code, this is how we do it. And so when you take a look at the bill as it passed the Senate, we doubled the business and occupation tax to small businesses, and really making sure it's gone up to $250,000. And so really creating an environment where a small business can actually grow and thrive until they become larger. So that's part of fixing on who pays the burden, because we really want to make sure the small businesses have that ability. We are increasing who is eligible for the working family tax credit. This is literally fixing an upside down code system so that those individuals who are paying the most get that credit on there. We also have, we're taking a look at other cuts that we can make to make sure that people get more dollars in their purses, because affordability is a huge issue. And we can also talk about the tariffs. I think there's a question on tariffs, and that has really been havoc and chaos on our economy, because we are a trade-dependent state. We have farmers, we have ports, and so the tariffs have really impacted the economy of the state of Washington over the last year and a half. So really making sure that this tax is done to make sure we have a much more equitable way of addressing taxes in the state of Washington. We cannot continue to only have three sources. Right now the three sources are sales tax, property tax, and D&O. And the other question we have received a lot of questions about is a property tax and for seniors. And we continue to work on that to see how we can continue to have seniors live in their homes. And this is how we're going to end up continuing to work on that issue. We passed a bill in the Senate that actually increased the threshold for the senior property tax exemption. I had worked on that bill a few years ago. This is the next new bill on really trying to see how we can keep our seniors in the home. We've had bills in the Senate that actually exclude your primary residence from paying property taxes. That is something I had co-sponsored as well, because I do think once we have a tax system that is actually working for everyone, we can look at things like excluding primary residents from property taxes. And those are the kinds of things we can do when we have a modern tax code, not one that's 100 years old. So I'm hoping I've addressed some of the senior tax burden as well, but it is something we continue to work on, but we can only make a lot more strides once we have a tax system that actually is working. And I just noticed another Redmond City Council member, Vivek, one of the youngest one we have. So thank you for being here. And did we miss anyone else?
Are there any school board?
Oh yes, we have Redmond School, not school, sorry. I was Redmond City Council member Minka Soni there as well. Oh, and I see you, Con. You're behind. You're hiding. Perfect. Anyone else that we missed? Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here.
So I'm glad that Senator Dinger brought up the working families tax credit. I was railing on about the super rich, but in order to balance, we want to provide again further mitigation against our regressive tax system by giving assistance to small businesses. Small businesses have to pay the business and occupation tax, which is incredibly regressive to business. And so in addition to, or as a complement to raising taxes from those who can very much afford it, we want to provide relief to small businesses, which is the backbone of our economy, from the business and occupation tax, as well as provide relief to the most marginalized, the most struggling families with the working families tax credit. So it's a balance. There's also a discussion about reducing the threshold for the estate tax, because the numbers need to pencil out. So I know that discussion's going on as well.
Glad you mentioned the estate tax. I am actually the sponsor of the reduction in the estate tax bill in the House. So we're taking it back from 30% tax to 20%, which is where it was last year. So we think that bill may be actually coming from the Senate, but there's a companion bill in the Senate, but I'm the sponsor in the House, and we'll just match them up, and that bill should happen fairly easily, I would guess.
I'll send that to Roger. I have a lot of questions here on healthcare. I did mention healthcare a little bit. I have the questions on the predictability for healthcare and do I support access to healthcare in Washington? Will I believe in healthcare for all? Yes, for all of that. I do believe healthcare is a human right. I think it is still shocking that people go into homelessness because of medical debt. That is one of the leading causes of homelessness in the state is medical debt. And I want to be very clear, medical debt is not something people voluntarily go and purchase, right? This is not like you purchasing an expensive car. This is something you have to do because your life's at risk. So we actually had a bill in the Senate that we sent over to the House that reduces interest payments on medical debt. And I'm excited to get that over the finish line because we cannot have people going into homelessness over medical debt. So I absolutely believe that healthcare is a fundamental human right. And we as a state have been moving towards having universal health care, having state-sponsored health care. Cascade Care has been fantastic. A lot of those systems that we have been working on are at risk, and we are risking them because of the healthcare subsidies that have gone away at the federal level. And so oh gosh, I can't remember how much the entire amount was, but we are actually paying something like $300 million a year in order to make the changes under the federal HR 1 bill. Because what it requires the state to do is to verify job employment every 6 months for individuals. These are individuals who have severe mental health issues, have substance use disorder issues, who are struggling I can tell you for all of us here who live in the very prosperous 45th legislative district, it is challenging many times for us to keep up with paperwork to make sure we renew our things that we need to. But to require the most vulnerable who are struggling to renew their insurance every 6 months to stay on federal Medicaid is shocking. And the statistics are that 30% of people fall off. So this is a policy that is purposefully enacted to harm the most vulnerable. There's no doubt about that, because the data is very clear. That is what happens when you put hurdles for people to access the care they need. So we as a state are really trying to figure out how we can partner with individuals to help these individuals continue to stay on their health care. And so we're just going to continue to try to see how we can figure that out. This is not something the state can solve on its own, because our entire system of government is based on the premise that the federal government is a partner to state government. And right now we have a federal government that is at war with state government. And the people that are most impacted are the most vulnerable. So I actually do not have good news on the healthcare front. We all understand that there are people who are actually going to die for lack of access to healthcare. Or the people who will get healthcare will do it very late in the game in our emergency rooms, causing more burdens to our hospitals. I will say everyone in the healthcare industry is working together to try to understand and figure out how we can move forward. But that recognition is there in the state of Washington. So, a lot of Children's Hospital is stepping up. We have a lot of our public district hospitals coordinating with others. I have a bill this session taking a look at private equity in healthcare. It's actually shocking how many venture capitalists and health and equity programs go in and buy out healthcare. This happened in Massachusetts. This happened in Massachusetts, where they had a private equity firm go in and buy 9 of their healthcare facilities, and then basically brought them to the ground in terms of setting up all the assets to make money. So the bill that I have, along with Chair Jamila Taylor, was just heard in the Law and Justice Committee last week. We're going to get second out this week. But we have to make sure that we are preventing our business-focused companies from buying healthcare, because healthcare is not about profitability. We continue to demand that everyone in the state of Washington follows Washington law in providing access to reproductive services, gender-affirming care, and end-of-life care, which, as we know, continues to be a problem. And just more on that, but I just want to acknowledge that everything relating to healthcare, I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to make that for what the federal government is doing to us. And that, unfortunately, goes to our DD services. We are really trying to hold the line in our budget and making sure that no one in that very vulnerable unit continues to lose services. So we're doing everything to hold the line with our DD services and our severe mental illness population. But I'll just let you know that it is really hard, and we'll just continue to fight to hold the line. But there are no services that are going to be expanding. But I will take the second to talk about a bill that's become one of my favorite bills in the session, and that is a bill about missing people. Many of us who have children, adults with severe mental illness, DD issues, know that when they go missing, there really isn't a lot we can do because they're adults and they're allowed to leave the home. We have a bill that was brought to me by Lake Washington School District Youth, creating a purple alert, and really doing what other states have done is changing our vulnerable individual law to apply to those individuals who are actively suicidal, who are severely mentally ill, that when they go missing, our law enforcement has the tools they need to bring them back. And with that, thank you. And with that, we also create the Ebony Alert, because most people don't know this, but Black people go missing at an extremely alarming number. And it is something that people really don't track. And other states that have an Ebony Alert actually are in a position to then recover those missing individuals. So that bill has both of those alerts to really make sure we're giving law enforcement the tools they need to recover individuals safely and then making sure we do understand what is happening with our Black population. We had a press conference on this, and one of the questions that was asked was, why do you think Black people are targeted? And this woman said, it's because a lot of the traffickers tell us that no one's going to come out looking for them. So it's a lot easier to traffic them because people aren't really caring about what happens to them. It was a very powerful moment, and so I'm excited about that. This is in the DD severe mental health realm, but please continue to reach out to me on specific instances when it comes to access to healthcare. We're going to continue to work on that. We're going to continue to see how we can strengthen our public health system and our public district systems. Thank you.
So, the bill related to missing persons, we're going to have the ebony alert and the purple alert. I'll be holding a public hearing in my committee on Monday. We're going to move it out on Tuesday. Majority Leader, as I was descending the marble stairs of the Capitol, said, make sure to move that bill yesterday. I said, don't worry, no amendments. So I just wanted to echo a number of things that Senator Gingrich said about healthcare and its effect on our budget negotiations. So the federal government cut about $1.5 billion out of Medicaid. So that's healthcare for those who otherwise cannot afford it. And also food, emergency food, and so forth. So our priority is to preserve life, that people can be fed and healthy and housed. And because our budget is so tight, because the feds have cut so much, that affects everything else that we would love to spend money on, but we just don't have the resources right now, which seems seemingly paradoxical because we live in an area that seems to be thriving. Our economy seems to be strong and so forth, although it is softening nationally. But we're not bringing in the revenue, and that brings in the revenue questions. But many, many bills go through the spending committees, the Appropriations Committee in the House, Ways and Means Committee in the Senate, and most of them are dying in those committees. Even though we are well-intended and want to provide essential programs and services, we just don't have them because we're being starved at the federal level and have to make up for it. Medicaid, for instance. Medicaid, we match whatever the feds provide. So since the feds are providing less, sure, we're going to match that, but then we have to make up for it over that. And so we have to come up with $1.5 billion, and we're already in a deficit by that much. So the budget situation is so tight, and then exacerbated by what the feds are doing to us. I just have to say that, and we'll talk in a moment about some of the other things we're doing to resist the federal regime, but people are asking me, how you doing? I'm like, I'm great. I'm working out, I'm sleeping well, I'm, hydrating and good nutrition, and I'm in love, And but the world around us, oh my God, this is really, it's hard to believe. I'm sort of switching between sports and movies and like skipping the news. It's not really the news anyway. It's entertainment. But this is a time in history that I hope we'll look back on with horror. That we're going to come out of it, but it is not normal. And all the attempts to outrage us are successful. I'm not outraged because I know that's what they're trying to do. But we just need to hold on and resist. And there's a number of different bills we're going to talk about here that are part of our resisting the federal regime. Just to comment on that, I'm calling it the federal regime. It's not the administration. The only thing they're administering, this is an assault on our communities. It's an assault on our rights. It's an assault on the law, on the rule of law itself. It's an assault on the truth. This hasn't happened before. It happened before in history in other countries, but it hasn't happened here yet. And we really need to respond to that.
I want to just transition to a couple of other questions that were turned in, and they're really pretty particular to the committee that I'm working on, and that's the Natural Resources Committee. One of the questions was where fire management is concerned, to what degree are we coordinating with our tribal partners throughout Washington. There are 29 federally recognized Native American tribes in Washington that have sovereignty, so we have to negotiate a government-to-government relationship with our tribal partners. They're not like another state agency where you can just assume that they'll follow your direction. They have their own governments. So where fire management is concerned, the tribes are often the entities that have dealt with wildfire and forest management longer than any of us have been here. So we spend a lot of time, I spend a lot of time, around fire management, working particularly with the Federated Tribes of the Colville. You know where the Colville tribes are? They're right in central Washington, basically from Grand Coulee Dam up to the Canadian border. And you can put money on, they will have a fire on their land almost every year. They are ground zero for fire management in the state of Washington. So we spend a lot of time working out mutual aid agreements with the tribal partners there. What is becoming a more recent phenomena, in addition to forest fires, the ones you normally think about, are grassland fires, which is what in 2022 destroyed the town of Malden just south of Spokane. The town of Malden, 80% of the town burned down in 3 hours. It was gone, including the fire station and the one truck they had. So the problem with grassland fires is the speed. They move so quickly. So now we're starting to partner up with the Nez Perce, the Umatilla, in that southeastern portion of Washington. So the answer to the question is we are in very close coordination with our tribal partners. The other issue that was natural resource oriented was there's been some controversy the last couple of years about the management of the advisory committee, the Wildlife Advisory Committee, that makes wildlife decisions, things like hunting seasons and the like, and the management of the natural environment. And we've had some very strong controversies within that organization, to the point where we had legislation that I sponsored a year ago to disband it and put all of that function under the governor's office. We backed off of that because we think there's another compromise coming. So the question here about the dysfunction in the Wildlife Management Agency within the Department of Fish and Wildlife, we are addressing that, and it's mostly being handled by the governor's office. And I think we'll probably work that out without having to disband the entire organization and start from scratch. So let me stop with that.
And we can go to data centers. So this is a question about how many data centers that operate in Washington. There are a lot of concerns about how much energy they consume, how much water they consume in order to run. So a few years ago, we had actually done a tax preference for building data centers. So you got a tax break if you build a data center in the state of Washington. And we had really done that to make sure that a lot of our, actually not just rural areas, urban and rural areas, have the data centers that were being built. And then a few years after that, we gave them another tax preference to make renovations and do updates to the data center. This year we had a bill that removed those tax preferences. And I had gone to an AI conference last year. We were really taking a look at energy needs around the country. And one of the things that was very apparent, a lot of states have a lot more data centers, and they all have buyer's remorse. Because the amount of water and energy they're consuming is taking it away from humans and from agriculture. And so there has to be a lot more regulation around them, so we get a clear understanding of how much they're utilizing and the impact it's having on all of your energy rates that you pay, because they have been increasing because of the data centers. So I will say we have tech companies that are trying to be good partners, where they are trying to find how they can pay more for their energy consumption, but in the Senate we got rid of all of the tax preferences because we have a budget to balance, and it didn't make sense to continue this tax preference. But these are real issues, especially as AI comes, because you do need a lot of data centers. And I will tell you, I worry about news that I hear, because these days it's so hard to really believe what's happening unless you go in there and verify. But I heard about, one of our great companies in the 45th that's looking at data centers in space. So more power to them if they can do data centers in space that don't utilize energy and water consumption for the people on planet Earth. So more on this, but we are removing the tax preference, and we're going to continue to really get more information on the consumption of energy and water and figure out how we can bill proportionately. So it's not the population of the state of Washington that is seeing increased rates on energy consumption. So more on that.
Well, just echoing I think the percentage of energy consumed has gone from like 1% to 3%, just because, and that's actually a huge amount, just because of what these data centers consume, thereby raising energy costs for all of us. Microsoft has made a commitment to pay for their own, and yet one other thing, not only are we ending the incentives, but we're going to prohibit any Climate Commitment Act funding from financing or subsidizing data centers as well. These are hugely successful companies that can probably pay their own way. The other thing is that I did want to comment on whatever you might think of Elon Musk. They are developing here in the 45th District satellites that serve as data centers that will run on solar energy. So hoping that they can launch those quickly so that we won't be having to pay. And then also because it's in space, there's no need for cooling. And so I kind of support that. Let's get those up in space so that we don't have to pay for data centers on Earth.
Okay, I'm going to address one more issue, sort of a land use, local government issue here, and then I'm going to go out in the audience and bring the microphone with me, and if there are questions that anybody would like to ask, we usually leave the last half hour for that. But one of the questions here was around homelessness, affordable housing, and specifically the degree to which there's concern by our city governments. And here in the 45th, we're Bellevue, Redmond, Kirkland, Issaquah, Sammamish, Woodinville, and then out to Duval. The population center, of course, is Kirkland, Redmond, and Bellevue, and up to Sammamish. And there is some legislation introduced in the House that would restrict the city's ability to zone properly, according to them, on ground floor. In other words, think of Totem Lake, the Totem Lake revitalization that you probably all had a struggle trying to find a place to park because it's such a success story. The legislation which would have restricted the city of Kirkland's ability to require all that commercial space on the ground floor could have simply been mandated to be housing. So think of what the Totem Lake Mall would look like today if all those shops were just other apartments. So we're amending that bill to give cities the opportunity to create their own zoning, because what works in Woodinville doesn't necessarily work in Sammamish. So this is a struggle we have often, the tension between the state government and our city partners. And particularly for me, having come from 11 years on the city council, I have a soft spot, plus I kind of hear a lot of it at home. And so we're trying to maintain that ability for cities to make that zoning call. There's some other legislation around cities' ability to enter into operating agreements with affordable housing projects, like a Plymouth Housing that might come to town and provide housing for low-income seniors, or homelessness individuals, like Kirkland has done at the La Quinta Inn. That will be a success one day when it opens, because Kirkland was able to cut an operational agreement with King County. And there was legislation in Olympia that would have prevented that, or would have made that much more difficult to do. So we're trying to address those issues. So
I just want to briefly talk about 2 or 3 or 4 criminal justice, public safety issues that have come up. One is about gun safety. Very disappointed that we could not get the bill through this year related to safe storage. Firearms are very often stolen out of vehicles, and the bill would have addressed liability for and the need to report if firearms are stolen. We were not able to get that bill through, but we're going to continue to push on that. There is a bill still alive about 3D printed guns. I've heard from a number of people working in marginalized communities that young people, age 12, 13, 14, possess 3D printed machine guns in their hand. And there's no traceability, it's all just manufactured. There's guns in the hands of young people more than there ever have been before. This is actually one of my priorities, is to intervene with young people who are possessing weapons, merely possessing a weapon. They haven't used it yet. They feel like they need to defend themselves. It's wrong-headed, but they're living in an area of community violence, and so they really feel like they have to defend themselves. But if we don't intervene and get the guns out of their hands, then the second, the third time someone is hurt and killed. But the 3D printed guns are a big part of the problem now. And so our colleague, Osman Salahuddin from the 48th, is sponsoring the bill that is moving through to prohibit those. I wanted to mention a couple of things related to what the federal government seems to be doing on our streets, and who knows, our dear leader back in the other Washington was quoted as saying, maybe we need a lighter touch, I think was his comment. You think? Anyway, just to brace ourselves for what may happen here, pitting our state and local law enforcement against federal civil enforcement, by the way. It's not criminal law, immigration law, it's civil law. So the fact that they're enforcing civil law in such an aggressive manner is really inappropriate. But they're wearing masks, they're unidentified, and so we are moving a bill through. I'm going to report the bill out of my committee on Monday. That requires identification, clear identification, and the compliance with our state laws that we put in place 5 years ago, so that law enforcement is clearly identified to the public, and that actually is essential to foster trust between law enforcement and the community. So we're going to be moving that bill through. There are some exceptions. Sometimes inclement weather and the SWAT team, and there are some police functions which do require some equipment, but we'll be making account for that. The other thing, and a couple, I think Louise, where are you? Thank you so much, Louise, for being a really effective advocate. You might have heard of what are called the flock cameras, or the automatic license plate readers. Please have the technology to look at whether it's a fixed camera or part of the dash cam in the vehicle, to look at your license plate and get a lot of information. That actually is helpful, very helpful for our local law enforcement to solve crimes, and yet the feds have been tapping into that and getting information in order for them to go find people who they want to kidnap off our streets and deport. So we're shutting that down. There's not going to be any access by the feds. We will preserve the ability for law enforcement to use this technology because it is very important, but we're going to circumscribe its use. The retention of data is going to be limited. The locations will be limited and so forth. So Louise, thank you for asking that question. That bill is going through the Judiciary Committee in a couple of days. And Osman Salahuddin, again, is the sponsor of the House version, so he's a rising star.
And I'll just say on the flock bill, in the Senate with Senator Trudeau and Senator Holy, our Republican colleague, who worked together on it, and even talking to our national partners, many people feel like the Washington bill that we have is going to be the model policy that flock will follow in the rest of the country. So I'm really continue to be excited about the work coming out of Washington in those two arenas. And the 3D printed gun bill was heard yesterday in my committee, and we'll be accepting it out next week. And I just want to say on a personal level, I sound a typical Indian where half my family are engineers, the others are doctors. I'm the only one that's a lawyer and not a politician. But, my husband, we got our first 3D printing machine when my oldest was in 3rd grade. She's now working. And my husband got another new 3D printer earlier this year. And the change in technology is incredible. I used to get these little plastic whistles made when the kids were little. Now my husband is printing all kinds of stuff that's really sophisticated. And so really making sure that you don't have digital files, that you can just print weapons is key. We've got to make sure that that is illegal. So we've got to keep up with technology. We can't always, because technology moves a lot faster than laws can, but I'm really excited to get this across the finish line, because we actually had I can't remember which school it was, where the kid actually had a 3D printed gun in the 45th district and brought it to school. So this is not a hypothetical, this is actually stuff that is happening currently. We have a few questions about education. And I'll just say, 50% of our budget goes towards public education. And I've had this conversation before, our kiddos are expensive, but you have to invest in our kids in order to have the society that we all want. And investment having been a prosecutor for 20 years, I can tell you, if you ask prosecutors, what's the best criminal justice reform we can make? They'll tell you, it's making sure our kids graduate high school. Having said that, I know our school system, I know our kids need a lot more investment. And right now it's about protecting what we can. So we cannot expand programs. I know Running Start is on the chopping block. I know a lot of great programs are on the chopping block. We cut 7%, we had 7% reduction in our budget last year. And people don't really talk about that because they all want to talk about tax increases. But those were real cuts that were made to real people who saw fewer resources. There will be cuts this year again. And cuts to programs that we know work really, really well. One of the programs that is so close to my heart is Transition to Kindergarten. In our district, we have the privilege that so many of our kids have gone to preschool. And we know that that preschool is what enables them to be successful adults. So when we did pre-kindergarten, like Transition to Kindergarten program statewide, and we got results back saying that this program is so successful. And that was limited last year. And so I just want everyone to be aware that when we're balancing our budget and everyone keeps talking about taxes, please don't forget the reductions that have been made, that continue to be made, and that the families and the kids that are impacted are real, and the long-term consequences, negative consequences to these cuts. So I'm sorry, I don't think there's money for more in MSOC. I'm sorry there's not enough money for more programs. But it is something that so many of us value and will continue to fight for.
I just want to follow up on that. Oh, go ahead, Larry, sorry. On education finance, again, the K through 12, we call it basic education. It's not 50%, it's 41%. And so we need to build it back up again, right? We had 1 year, 2018, I believe it was, when teachers were paid. There was, let's say, barely sufficient resources for our K through 12 system. We have 1.2 million students in this state. And Senator Dinger's right. It's about dosage. The more, the better, right? So, my position on education funding for this year's budget, which is a supplemental budget, so we already cut in the last year, but this year there's talk of cutting further to basic education, K-12, because there's been declining enrollments. A lot of new folks coming to the state. By the way, 200 people a day move to Washington State. This is a very popular place to be. There's a lot of great jobs here. People are not leaving the state. There's 200 people a day moving here. We're over 8 million now. So, and yet many of them are not married with children. There's a new sort of demographic profile of the people moving here. And so in the younger grades, there's actually declining enrollments in many areas, particularly in the Central Puget Sound area. Our school funding model is based on students, based on enrollment, and that's a flawed model. Most states do not have that model. The model for funding in education in other states is what is the need for those students and those schools. And so what I'm worried about is that our budget writers will reduce funding for K through 12 because there's been a reduced number of students. But that's reducing funding based on a flawed model. And so I'm really standing firm against that. We'll see what happens. And yet as we move forward, starting in 2027, I can't believe 2027 is next year, we really need to look at reforming our school financing model Okay, Larry, you can go.
Okay, so we're going to get out there on this. One thing I'll mention, our budget actually approaches 50% on education funding when you add in the K-12 higher ed, the CTC system, community colleges. Put all that together, and we're at about 50%.
Thank you, Larry.
Is Hank Marguson in here somewhere?
Early support.
What is that? You said, his question here was, where do you stand on reducing dollars spent on ESIT? What is ESIT?
Yeah, we know about that program, yeah. Unfortunately, that has been cut, the ESIT program, early support for infants and toddlers. And another trend, I can't believe we're cutting, I'm not on the budget committee, so I get to kind of complain. But last year, we cut the number of slots for preschool for the first time. We preserved it through the difficult economic times, but last year we actually cut slots and also did not increase the reimbursement. So early learning professionals barely get paid enough. So ESIT is part of the cuts. In addition, we cut what I created years ago, which was early ECAP. There's Head Start, but then there's early Head Start in the federal level, which is for the birth to 3. It's basically parenting education, extremely helpful. And then on the state level, sort of modeled after early Head Start, we created early ECAP, again, a high quality program. We've kept it on the books, it's in the law, but it's been swept, so there's no funding for that. So I'm grieving about that as well, so I share your concern.
So, we've got a few minutes left here. If there are questions that you would like, please raise your hand. I'll come around with the mic. I will hang on to the mic. In order to cut down on speeches, questions, please.
Good morning. I read a story in the paper last week about a very large warehouse being purchased for a detention center in Spokane, and I'm wondering if there's been anything done or can be done in the legislature about those facilities or the plans by the federal government to open those kinds of facilities.
Yes, to a great extent, we cannot tell the federal government what to do or control them. The federal government can purchase property and so forth, and they very well can use, and we know that the federal government is using private homes, abandoned motels, other places other than jails, and other detention facilities. There's only one detention facility in the state, in Tacoma. So we're trying to do a lot, and it's really about transparency. So we're moving a bill through that would require the ICE detention center in Tacoma to report in a timely fashion at what we call critical incidents. There's suicides, there's assaults, there's sexual assaults. There was a suit just brought against the federal government for sexual assault of the prisoners there. So and just the health conditions are atrocious. So transparency, we're trying to shine a light on what's going on there. Similarly, with regard to those other locations where they're trying to house individuals, we want transparency. We would maybe create a registry where all places of detention have to just register, and it wouldn't be a problem with our jails and prisons. But we want to know where they are, and that's critically important.
We get a question right here.
Actually, Larry, let me just expand on that. We actually also have another facility in Whatcom County. So during the first Trump administration, we had taken a look at what we could do around there. So we have, we do require ordinances to the Department of Health to make sure they can regulate what's going on in terms of health and sanitation conditions. We are asking the locals to make sure they have permitting and citing rules and laws that these detention centers are abiding by. And there was another facility in Whatcom County, which at that point in time wasn't being utilized. However, last year we heard that it was being utilized, and when they had ICE raids in Whatcom County, they actually have been using that as well. There is a company based out of Bellevue that is actually contracting with ICE in a few of the facilities around the state. Senator Slatter was very concerned that this was a company in her district engaging in this behavior, so we're going to continue to look at that to make sure that people have awareness on what is happening. There's a bill that was sent from the Senate to the House that basically says, so while we require Department of Health to have regulations around it, they're not allowing Department of Health to come in to do the verification they need to do. So we have a bill that says, hey, if you deny them entry, you'll be fined $1,000 a day. If you deny them entry after 20 days, you'll be fined $5,000 a day. So we, I don't care if it's the federal government. If you're in the state of Washington, you follow the rules of the state of Washington. So we will continue to lead on that and see what we can do. And they have to treat people
So let's give a question.
I just want to say that the ICE activity in Washington State is not hypothetical. The Acropolis restaurant downtown Kirkland, couple ICE officers, they're kind of getting tricky now. They went in and sat down for a meal, wearing puffer jackets, no other ID, and at the end of the meal, then went to the back of the house to try to find people who they believe are undocumented. The El Gaucho restaurant in downtown Seattle, an armed raid the other night by ICE officers. So it's happening here.
Okay, now we'll try a question here.
Okay, this one may not even be on your radar of importance, but every week I see more and more opportunities to end up with some kid in an e-bike, powered bike, on my crew. So what is being done to enforce either helmet laws to begin with or regulate the age bracket that is allowed on a bike? These are 12 and 13-year-olds, and the other day it was a power scooter going up Thin Hill. I came over the ridge and here are these two girls shooting across the road. They could have been on my grill.
Actually, I will give an attempt to answer that because before session started, I was invited to Lake Washington High School for their advanced placement government class. And the challenge for the government class was to write 3 bills that they wanted to pass and work through the legislature. One of them was on e-bike safety. And so we reviewed that. I listened to the presentation. They had all kinds of things that they had entered into the safety regime there, from helmets to licensing to speed to age. That bill I took to Olympia and suggested that Representative Zahn from the 48th, 48th, 41st, that she is sponsoring that bill, and I think there's one, Mock, isn't there one in the Senate?
Yeah, it's a Schumach bill. We voted it off the Senate floor. It's in the House now. And trust me, when I walk my dog in Redmond, I have seen those bikes all last year, and I'm shocked at how young these kids are and how fast they're going. So it is on our radar, and we have a bill.
Okay, another question here.
So, listening here today, I wrote down resist the feds, rule of law, and talking about funding. I'd like to start out by saying we have a $38.6 trillion national debt. This is serious. And I think one of the things that bothers me, quite honestly, at these meetings I watch on TV and this, is they don't talk about the $38.6 trillion debt. If you thought in 2008 we had a mess and had something on our hands, a problem, if we default, this will be a disaster. And so I'm looking also at, I lived in Minnesota for 14 years. And I'm looking at the fraud that went on in the state of Minnesota. And as a citizen of that state, because Minnesota ICE existed, they were actually welcoming that type of activity. Minnesota people are very welcoming. And my question is, what are we doing about fraud in the state of Washington, taking a look at it? Especially, I'm watching the people, when it comes to federal funds, I don't see a lot of concern on the part of people in the states, state government, really saying, oh, we really have to look into this thing.
So I'll just start by saying we have a very active statewide elected official called the state auditor, who will go to all kinds of agencies all over the state, local governments. Each city gets audited periodically. They're very intense audits to look for exactly what you're talking about. The state of Washington, when we write our budget, we are required by law to write a balanced budget. We cannot have a deficit. Unfortunately, the federal government doesn't have that constraint, but we at least are trying to model good behavior here. I can tell you that part anyway.
And while Roger makes his way to bring some people in front, I'll just say we are an outline in which we require a 4-year balanced budget in the state of Washington. Most of the states don't require that. We've had a AAA bond rating for the last 7 years that I'm really proud of. And the auditor's office is again something where Washington is an outlier where we have that independent audit. And so you don't hear a lot of those stories coming out of Washington. And when you do, they're addressed right away because we have a robust system at the state level. And King County on its own also has an auditor system. So recently, last year, I don't know if you heard, the auditor came up with a report on how some of the dollars were being spent to nonprofits, and then that was being addressed. So it was on the paper and was found because we have the auditor. So I actually love the accountability and transparency that we have in the state of Washington.
And we have
I'll just say that we could probably find $500 million in waste, fraud, and abuse out of an $80 billion budget. All right, I mean, there's always a haircut somewhere. But like I said, back in the Great Recession, we cut to the bone, and we're still building back. So I think you can always find something here or there to make a point. But we are providing essential services and programs to people who need it.
Okay, question here.
I'm Stacy Valenzuela from Kenmore, and I came to get your guys' view because we need to know what you're doing to keep our seniors, veterans, and those on disabilities in their houses. We're seeing every single month several being homeless because of the corporate investors that use AI to outprice them, because HUD suddenly increased senior housing to 50% AMI, which is actually workforce housing. And nothing's really being done to help them. Yes, there's a little senior women's shelter, but it only fits 25 people, and they're in cubicles. And I come from a manufactured home community of seniors. Most of my neighbors earn about $1,600 a month, and they only get $24 a month in SNAP. This is despicable that they're being priced out. And Plymouth does not help seniors. We need to make sure that's clear. And we've had a registry that was supposed to be compulated on manufactured home communities in Washington since 2007, and they're so far behind.
So I'll just say, we had a bill in the Senate that we sent over on the threshold that I had mentioned to enable people, seniors to stay in their home. And I know that's a lot more usable outside of the 45th district. Senator Alvarado continues to lead on this issue and is really taking a look at corporations that are buying properties. And I think our Attorney General had sued over using AI in order to do rent pricing. And I know we passed the rent stabilization bill last session. But there's so much more we have to do, but we continue to make slow progress. And I go back to the point, like, we needed our federal government to be a partner in this, and with them just taking away all responsibility and letting basically corporations do what they want to do, it's a much tougher task for us.
Okay, we've got another question here.
With the Flock bill, Flock is integrating Ring doorbell cameras into their system, their AI, and with that they can see in front of and the people and general views in front of hundreds of thousands of houses across Washington. How will that be dealt with in addition to Flock street cameras?
So that bill is coming, already had its hearing. The bill is actually troubled in a number of different ways. We're going to fix it. The Flock camera is a fixed location, and you're right, other data can be uploaded into it, and we're doing our best to try to restrict, more than anything else, restrict access by those who shouldn't have it. Law enforcement uses these cameras for investigation and solving crimes, and I don't know if there's been a lot of excess by our state and local law enforcement. We were alerted when the feds were tapping in, so we need to restrict that access. However, there are other vendors, other companies that make other types of cameras, including a device on the dash, which is not just a dash cam, but also a red light and the automatic license plate reader. And those vehicles are moving around and capturing a lot of stuff out there. And so we're trying to figure out how to restrict access to that information. The license plate information is important for law enforcement, but not places of worship, daycare centers, parks, and so forth. So we're really trying to figure out how to structure it so that that's not exposed and people aren't liable.
So I'll just add to that, there are a few things that have been done in that bill, and one is on who controls the data and who owns the data. So for law enforcement, it's made very clear that the company doesn't own that data, the state does. And so we don't allow secondary dissemination of that data. For private individuals that are, companies that are using it, say like your grocery store or something like that, we don't allow them to share that data. We don't allow The company, again, that provides the cameras to own that data. And so that is key to figure out who owns that data and whether you can limit secondary dissemination. And that is what that bill is attempting to do. And then requiring, if you are a parking lot, that you have to delete all that data within, I think for parking lots, we did a few hours because you just need it for parking enforcement. So being really
72 hours.
72 hours, thank you. So really being deliberate on what purpose is being used for and who controls that data. And yes, I think we were all appalled by that Super Bowl ad. I don't know if people thought that was okay to follow your pets around the neighborhood. It's very freaky. But a lot of that is around, when you take a look at AI, when you take a look at technology, it comes down to who controls data and what you can do with that data. And so that's what we're looking at.
Okay, I'm going to try really hard to get 3 more questions. 1, 2, 3. Quickly.
Hi there, Naomi Watts. Family of 3 with a 3-year-old. Child care in Kirkland is $2,200 to $3,700 a month. That's 50% of our income. The other 50% is mortgage. We don't qualify for ECAP, Head Start, the things that you have to be at federal poverty level. Thank God we're not at that level. But at the same time, the only thing we qualify for, Working Connections subsidy, that's getting cut by 11,000 in like June. But 11,000 families out of 44,000. So that could possibly, potentially be the only thing we qualify for. We recently discovered. And then there's a county thing. We don't have a thing for the city, and Seattle has child care assistance. We don't have a thing for the city. So families like us that have a 3-year-old, that we have to have in daycare in order to work, like we are in debt deficit every single month. What is being done for early childhood? ESA's cut, ECAP is cut. Families not being served with these young children, and it is long-term effects on that.
Yeah, thanks, Naomi, and I did read your card, and I'm glad that you spoke up. A couple things. One, the majority leader came around to us House members and asked about the governor's budget. He's managing the budget process on the House side. And I immediately said, $100 million cut to Working Connections? Working Connections is the subsidized child care program we have. Unacceptable. So we have to fund our subsidy for child care for those who can't otherwise afford it, so you would benefit from that. We'll see what happens. I can't imagine that we're going to go along with a $100 million cut. At the same time as we're seeing the Ballmer family fund the preschool, but we're depending on quirky billionaires now to fund government services. You know, what if he decides to cut it? Let's go to the Rotary Club, have them fund government services. I shouldn't say I'm in the Rotary Club. But the other thing really is the structural issue I bring up all the time. We live, the 45th district, I believe, is the second most affluent district in the state, measured by the number of children who live in poverty. Fewer than 4% of the children in our district live in poverty, compared to, for instance, like Yakima Valley and that area, where 75% of the children live below the poverty level. So we are really affluent, and we're unstable. Any ecosystem needs diversity, and we do not have socioeconomic diversity in our district because of the cost of living, the cost of housing, and so forth. The jobs here pay hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. The houses are worth $2, $3, $4, $5 million each, and so I can't afford to live in my own district. And so it's a structural problem where those who work here can't live here. So then they clog up the roads because of having to live in Marysville or Federal Way or North Bend. North Bend is even unaffordable. So we are a victim of our own success. We have created great jobs, and yet it has increased the cost of living to the point where Naomi and her family can barely afford to survive, and I myself, because we earn a whopping $68,000 a year, which seems like a lot of money to me, but I guess that's a low, relatively low income in the legislature.
I'll just add, I mentioned before I was a prosecutor for 20 years, my salary went to pay childcare, and we lived off my husband's salary. Yeah. That is ridiculous. And I'll tell you, that's one of the reasons why we have the millionaire's tax, because our tax structure is so upside down. We cannot help people at the middle class and lower middle class. And so really, I cannot stress how important it is for us to fix our tax structure so we can actually start governing the state with the expectations that all of you have, so we can make the most vulnerable among us thrive. Because we know that is what continues to be successful for a state. So more on this, but I hear you. Childcare is so ridiculously expensive. And we were having a conversation earlier, like what did we see during COVID? Like I was so excited that I see our society moving towards co-parenting. love all you men, our husbands taking more responsibility, and COVID hit, and what happened? It was the women who left the workforce to take care of the kids and to take care of the elderly. Are those women back in the workforce? No, because we don't have appropriate resources for childcare or for elder care. So these are huge structural problems we have to change, and in order to get there, we've got to change our tax code.
Okay, I'm gonna try my best to get 2 more questions in, and then we have an interesting question that was asked of all 3 of us at the end here that we can address here, so quickly.
I'm Ruth Agella, so my question was, will the millionaire tax bring back the 7th period at our high schools? And I'm asking this because I am a freshman at Lake Washington High School, and right now all of my credits are just going towards the requirement classes, and I don't really have the choice to take new classes to try new things.
That is about a direct question that you have asked about money. What do you say? Will the millionaire's tax bring back the 7th?
That depends on our schools, but I'll tell you, my kids went through Lake Washington High School, and I remember when they were doing the 7th period, and that time the thinking was, we're going to do 7th period so that our kids can take extra classes that have their interest. I will take responsibility for all Asians when I say, what do you think the kids did? They added another AP class. So our kids do not need 20 AP classes to graduate. They don't even need 15 AP classes to graduate. So we have to figure out how we're reducing stress on our kids. And I don't think, personally, adding extra periods is the way to do it. We have to figure out how kids figure out what they can do to be successful and what they need for college. But adding 7th, 8th periods so they can add 2, 3 more AP classes is not it. The stress level in our schools is out of control. The anxiety our kids feel is out of control. That is not what they should be experiencing in school. So I love that you want a 7th period. I will let the school districts figure it out. But kids, please be kids.
Okay, we got one last question here, and then we'll take that question that was asked of all 3 of us up there, so go ahead.
Thank you. You mentioned problems with ICE a couple of times, and my understanding is that the state of Minnesota was able to diffuse some problems they were having with ICE by providing ICE with the information that ICE was requesting related to criminal histories of illegal immigrants that allowed ICE to accomplish its work and also allow them to reduce the number of ICE officers in Minnesota State, reduce collateral impact. I'm wondering if Washington State could work with ICE in a similar way and help, focus on getting the illegal immigrants who are breaking the law, particularly violent criminals, and getting them out of the country.
Sure. So we actually if you get a judicial warrant, that is not a problem. We just expect ICE to follow the rule and follow the law, which means you go get a judicial warrant. And if they do, that is not a problem in our state. But they cannot go in with administrative warrants that have no oversight, and they cannot break people's civil rights. But judicial warrant, absolutely, that's not a problem.
The other thing, though, is that by law currently, those who are undocumented non-citizens who have committed crimes and gone through our judicial system and been incarcerated are still there. Why isn't ICE going into the prisons and taking those who have been convicted of offenses and should not legally be in the country for that reason, criminal reason? No, they're going after people who they don't like what they look like, who have been law abiding. My dry cleaner has had his business in Kirkland for 26 years. His daughter's in the U.S. Marines. His other daughter sells multi-million-dollar houses as a realtor. He's afraid to go out. People are having to carry their papers. This is not what America should be.
So we had this interesting question that came earlier, and it says, what work do you hope to continue or begin working on next session that you didn't finish or get to this session? One of the dynamics of this job is that when a session starts in January, you never know what it is that's going to suck the air out of the room you live in for the rest of the session. Sometimes the weirdest stuff shows up that you have no idea about. The one that showed up for me this last session, which is going to carry over to next session, is to of the Colville and the federal government reclamation Columbia Basin project to determine who owns how much water in the upper Columbia. Who knew? Water adjudication law is about as arcane as any law you can imagine. It takes decades to solve these problems, and that's what I'm going to be working on next year. So, give me faith.
So I already mentioned this, but my two public safety priorities are to address public disorder. Our crime rates are at historic lows. Violent crime and other crimes are at historic lows. We're talking like mid-1960s levels. But nobody believes it because they go out and they see a lot of public disorder. People suffering from behavioral health problems, who are unhoused, and so they don't feel safe. And so a key really is to deploy our resources to intervene with those who are suffering from behavioral health disorders and to take care of them. I mean, we could use a rough, tough phrase, clean up the streets. But in fact, that's really what we're talking about, so that people can feel like we have a thriving civil society that's safe to be in public spaces. But more than anything else, I want to get firearms out of the hands of young people. Because it's hard, it's very difficult. There's a sort of the instant, or the impulse to punish. If a young person has a firearm in their hand, we want to punish them or threaten to punish them as an incentive to go into some sort of a diversion program. Maybe a few would, but it would actually be casting a net widely in a punitive way over those who are the least advantaged in our society. So I want to develop community violence intervention strategies where we can intervene with young people who have firearms in their hands and they believe it's for good reason to defend themselves, but as I said, it's wrong-headed. And then put them at the center of their own lives and ask them where they want to go and wrap around them and give them what they need, and then they'll go on a better path.
So I'll just add all my Excel spreadsheets. I already have one started for 2017. No, oh my gosh, what decade am I? 27, poor Daisy, I think we're already up to what, 12, 13 on that Excel spreadsheet? So I'm just going to talk more about categories. I've already mentioned healthcare. Healthcare is huge to me. I think for-profit entities in healthcare is highly problematic. I think mergers and acquisitions in our healthcare are highly problematic. I work on that every year. I'll continue to do so. We're going to continue to do a lot of work on civil commitment. I think our designated crisis responder system is an outlier, and finally we need to get rid of it. So those are the big buckets on it. We always have bills that come from our constituents. One of my favorite bills that a constituent brought to me was getting the state of Washington to prescribe breast milk, and it was a surgeon who brought it to me, and we passed it in a session. And now you can prescribe breast milk for preemies, babies that are premature, and instead of pumping them full of drugs, you actually give them breast milk, and that's literally all they need. And so I always have room for all the brilliant ideas that come from each and every one of you. So I'm actually also going to take this moment to thank each and every one of you for being here, for engaging in this process, because democracy is a team sport. You gotta participate if you want to get anything done. So thank you so much for being here and your continual engagement. And I'll just say this again. Y'all, the work that you do, you know where the problems are. You also know what the solutions are. And we're not hard to find. So especially during interim, come and tell us what you're seeing in the community, and also tell us what you think the solutions are, because most of the time, you guys are right. And so I'm happy to make sure we're working in collaboration to make sure each and every one of our lives are better.
Brief concluding remarks. I could be found at George's restaurant in Kirkland 3 to 4 mornings. But seriously, so when we're in the session down at the Capitol, it's 5 minutes of this, 30 seconds of that. It's just, it's a popcorn machine. And so what really helps for us to represent you better is to get FaceTime for a lengthy period. Put one thing on the radar screen so that we can concentrate on it. So I invite you to invite me to breakfast at George's any morning, and I'd be happy to talk about whatever issue that you care about.
And Roger will buy. Thanks, everybody. Enough said. Thank you.